The wind swept through Bridgetown like a whisper from the mountains, carrying with it the smell of pine and the sting of snow. It was the last week of December 2022, and the town square lay buried beneath thick white drifts. The Church of St. Jude stood quietly at the center, its bell tower crowned with frost. Near the stone steps, a little girl in a worn red coat stood behind a wooden tray of candy. Her name was Lily Grace. She could barely see over the tray, yet her gloved fingers moved carefully, arranging the tiny bags of peppermint as though they were treasures. Beside her sat her brother Eli, 3 years old, bundled in a faded blanket that once belonged to their mother. His cheeks were pale, his lips blue, but his small hand clung to Lily's coat as if she were the only solid thing in the world. Snow kept falling. The few people passing by hurried to their cars, their boots crunching on the frozen pavement. Some looked at the children with a moment's pity. Most didn't look at all. From across the square came Mrs. Hargrove, the heavy woman who owned the grocery nearby. Her fur collar was dusted with snowflakes that never dared melt on her. She stopped in front of Lily and frowned. "Still that many left," she said, her voice sharp and cold. "There, you're too slow again. No supper until you sell them all. Do you hear me?" Lily nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Hargrove sniffed, took the coins from the little tin cup, and turned away without a word of thanks. The jingle of her bracelets vanished into the wind. Lily watched her go, then looked down at her brother. Eli's eyes were half closed. She bent closer, brushing the snow from his lashes. "Hold on, Eli," she whispered. "Please, let my brother eat tonight." The words rose like a breath of steam and vanished into the snow. A few yards away, a tall man had stopped. Ethan Cole, 35, known to the newspapers as one of Vermont's quiet millionaires, had just left the evening service. The cold never bothered him. What unsettled him was the echo of that small voice. He stood still while others passed, listening. The girl's whisper had pierced something long buried beneath his fine wool coat, a memory of another winter, another hunger. He remembered a night in an orphanage when he was a boy of 8. The snow had blown through a cracked window above his bed. He had folded his hands and prayed not for warmth, not even for a toy, just for a piece of bread for his younger bunkmate. "Please let him eat," he had said, and no one had heard. Until now, decades later, the same plea returned to him, spoken by another child. Ethan watched as Lily tried to sell a bag to a couple leaving the church. They smiled politely, said they had no cash, and walked on. The girl didn't beg. She simply nodded and turned back to the snow, tucking the bag under her arm to keep it from blowing away. Her dignity, so small and fierce, tightened something in his chest. He reached into his pocket, finding a $20 bill. But when he stepped forward, the old instinct of privacy stopped him. He had built his fortune on staying unseen, helping from the shadows where gratitude couldn't reach him. Still, the whisper replayed in his mind. Ethan crossed the street to the small cafe opposite the church. Through the fogged window, he could still see her figure, a red speck against the white. The waitress poured him coffee and smiled. "Cold night for anyone to be out there," she said. He nodded, stirring the cup without drinking. Across the glass, he watched Mrs. Hargrove return once more, taking another handful of coins from the tin. Lily bowed her head. Ethan's jaw tightened. When he finally left the cafe, the square was nearly empty. Only the church bell broke the silence, tolling 6 times before fading into the snow. Lily was packing her candy clumsy with numb fingers. She lifted Eli onto her back, his head resting on her shoulder, and started down the alley toward a row of dim apartments. Ethan followed at a distance, his footsteps muted by snow. The sight of the tiny figure carrying her brother through the drifting flakes would stay with him long after she disappeared into the dark. At the corner, a gust of wind blew her voice back to him, once more faint but clear. "Thank you, Lord, for letting him sleep." Ethan stopped the snow swirling around his boots. The bell rang again, softer this time, almost like an answer. He looked up at the church spire and, for the first time in years, whispered a prayer of his own. That night, while Bridgetown slept beneath its heavy quilt of snow, the man who had everything could not close his eyes. Somewhere beyond his window, a little girl's prayer had found its echo. And in the silence between 2 falling snowflakes, Ethan Cole decided that tomorrow would not be the same. Ethan Cole did not sleep that night. The snow had stopped before dawn, leaving the world covered in a silence so complete that even his thoughts seemed too loud. From his bedroom window, he could see the faint spire of St. Jude, a dark shape against the pale morning sky. Somewhere near those steps, a little girl and her brother had spent the night in a cold apartment waiting for a kindness that never came. He brewed coffee and sat by the window, his hands wrapped around the cup for warmth he didn't need. On his desk lay a folder of numbers, plans for another expansion of his company, but the figures meant nothing. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her red coat and the way she had bowed her head when the woman took her coins. By mid-morning, he put on his coat and went out. The air smelled of ice and chimney smoke. When he reached the church square, Lily Grace was already there. She stood in the same place arranging the candy as if yesterday had never happened. Eli sat near her feet, tracing circles in the snow with one mitten. Ethan watched from across the street. He could have walked over, introduced himself, said something simple like, "Merry Christmas." But that would draw attention, and attention had never done anyone any good. He preferred the quiet way, the way where no one had to say thank you. He stepped into the cafe again and chose the table by the window. The waitress recognized him and smiled. "You're out early, Mr. Cole. Another storm coming tonight, they say." He nodded. "So I heard." Outside, Mrs. Hargrove lumbered toward the church, her fur coat gleaming in the weak sun. She spoke sharply to Lily, her hands slicing the air. Ethan couldn't hear the words, but he saw the fear in the child's posture, the way she shrank without running. When the woman left, Lily knelt to comfort her brother, her small face turned toward heaven. Ethan called the waitress over. "Could you bring a hot chocolate, extra marshmallows? And maybe a sandwich." "For you?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "For the little one by the church. Just leave it on their tray when you pass." The woman looked surprised, then nodded. A few minutes later, she walked outside and placed the food beside the candy box. Lily's eyes widened. She looked around the square, saw no one, then whispered something to Eli before giving him the sandwich. He ate slowly, savoring every bite. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Back at his office later that day, Ethan asked his assistant to discreetly look into the ownership of Hargrove's Mart. By evening, he had the file unpaid taxes complaints from customers, a note about volunteer children who never received wages. He closed the folder, anger simmering quietly beneath the calm surface of his face. That night, the wind returned. Ethan drove through the town again past the dark windows of the grocery. Inside, Mrs. Hargrove counted her money by lamplight, unaware of the car idling outside. He didn't knock, he simply watched for a moment, then drove to the church. Lily was still there, though the square was empty. She had built a tiny snow fort for Eli and was telling him a story, something about angels and stars. The boy laughed, his breath forming little clouds in the air. Ethan stood by the gate unseen until the church bell rang 6 times. Father Raymond came out, brushing snow from his shoulders. "You two should be home by now," he said gently. "We're going," Lily replied. "I just wanted to finish the story." The priest smiled. "You have a kind heart, Lily. God sees it even when others don't." Ethan felt the words strike deep. He waited until they had gone, then walked into the church. The candles flickered against the stained glass, throwing colors onto the floor. He dropped a small envelope into the donation box, no name. Just a note for those who still wait for kindness. Inside was a check large enough to heat every apartment on the block for the rest of the winter. When he stepped back outside, the snow had begun again, soft and endless. He glanced toward the alley where the children lived. A single light burned behind a curtain. Perhaps they were finally warm. For the first time in years, Ethan smiled without feeling the weight of it. He walked home through the quiet streets, his footprints filling slowly with snow. Somewhere behind him, the church bell chimed, once faint and tender, like a heartbeat in the night. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The next morning, Mrs. Hargrove would find her store's records missing from her safe. By then, Ethan would already be on a call with his lawyer, setting in motion a purchase that would change Bridgetown forever. But for now, he simply walked under the falling snow, letting the whisper of the wind remind him that not every good deed needs a witness. The storm came without warning. By dusk, the wind had turned violent, sweeping across Bridgetown, as if the mountains themselves were exhaling. The church bell rang once, then was swallowed by the roar of the snow. Streetlights flickered, dim halos in a wall of white. Most shops had closed early. Doors were locked, curtains drawn. But in the square beneath the trembling glow of a single lamp, Lily Grace still stood with her tray of candy. Her red coat was stiff with ice. Snowflakes clung to her eyelashes, melting into tiny drops that froze again on her skin. Eli huddled close to her legs, too cold to speak. Almost done, she whispered, though no one was listening. "We can't go home yet, Eli. Mrs. Hargrove said we have to finish." The boy didn't answer. His head rested against her knee, eyes half closed. Lily tucked the blanket tighter around him, trying to shield him from the wind. The snow stung her face like sand. She thought of the tiny room they called home, the thin window, the cracked floor, and prayed silently that the storm would pass soon. Across town, Ethan Cole watched the storm from his office window. The sky was a blur of white. He had spent the day signing papers, setting in motion the purchase of Hargrove's Mart through a charitable front. Everything was ready, yet his thoughts kept drifting back to the church steps. He imagined the little girl there, stubborn against the wind. He tried to convince himself she had gone home. But something deeper, an old instinct, the one that had once saved him, told him otherwise. He grabbed his coat and keys. The drive to the square was slow and blinding. His headlights cut narrow tunnels through the snow, revealing ghost-like trees and the shimmer of frost on the pavement. When he reached the church, the world was nearly erased. He could barely see the steps, only the faint outline of the lamppost bending under the weight of ice. Then he saw her. Two small shapes curled against the stone wall, half buried in snow. Lily's arms wrapped around Eli, her face pressed against his hair. Ethan rushed from the car, the cold slapping his lungs. "Lily," he called, though she couldn't hear him. He knelt, brushed snow from her face. Her lips were blue, her lashes crusted with ice, but her chest still moved slowly, stubbornly. He lifted Eli first, then Lily, and carried them both inside the church. The great doors groaned open, spilling a wave of warm candlelight across the marble floor. Father Raymond appeared from the shadows, startled. "Dear God," the priest whispered. "Bring them to the rectory, quick." Together they laid the children near the fire. Father Raymond fetched blankets and warm water. Ethan rubbed Lily's hands, murmuring her name again and again. After a moment, she stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Eli," she breathed. "He's right here," Ethan said softly. "He's safe." She stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to place the face behind the voice. Then she smiled faintly before sleep claimed her again. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the stained glass windows. Inside, the church glowed like a lantern in the storm. Ethan sat by the hearth, watching the children sleep. Father Raymond handed him a cup of tea. "I see the Lord's hand in strange places," the priest said quietly, "and sometimes he uses ours." Ethan looked into the fire, the priest's words echoing through the chambers of his memory. "Then maybe it's time I used mine for something that matters." The next morning, the storm broke. Sunlight poured through the clouds, turning the snow into a field of diamonds. News spread quickly through Bridgetown. Hargrove's Mart had been sold overnight to the Bridgetown Community Fund. The deed was signed, notarized, and filed at dawn. Mrs. Hargrove arrived at her store to find the locks, change the notice pinned to the door. This property is now part of a charitable foundation serving children in need. Her protests filled the street, but no one listened. People whispered that justice had come quietly, wrapped in the same snow that had covered the town. In the rectory, Lily woke to the smell of bread. Eli sat beside her, eating carefully, his cheeks pink again. Ethan stood by the window, phone in hand, speaking softly to his lawyer. When he noticed Lily awake, he hung up. "You're safe now," he said. "You don't have to sell candy anymore." Lily blinked. "Did you do this, mister?" He hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe someone just wanted to see you warm." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, half-melted peppermint. "You can have this one," she said. "It's the last." Ethan took it gently, the sweet sticking to his glove. For a moment, he couldn't speak. The church bell rang, filling the room with soft echoes. Father Raymond entered, holding a newspaper. "Seems our town has found a new benefactor," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Though no one knows who." Ethan shrugged. "Kindness doesn't need a name." The priest nodded. "Still, it's good to know it exists." Outside, the children of Bridgetown were already playing in the fresh snow, their laughter rising like music. Ethan watched from the window, the peppermint warm in his palm. He turned it over once, then slipped it into his pocket beside his heart. The sound of the bell followed him as he stepped outside. The air was clean and the world bright. The storm had ended, but its echo remained a reminder that even the quietest act of kindness can outlast the loudest winter. When Lily opened her eyes, she saw candles instead of snow. The ceiling above her glowed golden, and for a long moment, she thought she had awakened inside one of the stories her mother used to tell, where angels lived in the light. Then she heard the soft creak of a chair, the faint crackle of a fire, and realized she was still in Bridgetown, still alive. A wool blanket covered her up to the chin. Beside her, Eli slept soundly, his breathing slow and steady. His small hand reached out from under the blanket stool, holding the corner of her coat. A cup of broth sat on the table near his head, steam curling into the air. "Good morning, little one," said a gentle voice. It was Father Raymond, the priest of St. Jude. He sat by the fire glasses, sliding down his nose as he turned the page of a book. When Lily tried to sit up, he waved his hand lightly. "Don't rush. You've had a long night." Lily blinked, still disoriented. "Where's the snow outside where it belongs?" He smiled. "You're safe here now." The church bell rang somewhere above them, its tone soft and slow. It reminded her of the sound she'd heard just before she fainted. "Did someone bring us here?" Father Raymond looked at her kindly. "A good man did. He asked me not to say his name, but I believe you've met him before." Lily thought for a moment, but her memory was a blur of wind and light. Was he an angel? The priest chuckled. Maybe one with a heavy coat and tired eyes. At that moment, the door creaked open, letting in a draft of cold air and the scent of pine. Ethan Cole stood there, tall against the morning sun. His hair was dusted with frost, and his eyes carried the exhaustion of a sleepless night. He hesitated before stepping in. "I wanted to make sure they're all right. They're better than you. Look," Father Raymond said, closing his book. "Come warm yourself." Ethan walked to the hearth, his gaze falling on the two small figures. Lily looked up, recognition dawning slowly. "You're the man from the snow," she said softly. Ethan smiled, kneeling beside her. I remember the light," she whispered, and someone's voice saying we were safe. That was the truth, he said. "You are safe." Lily looked at the steaming cup on the table. "Did you bring this?" "Maybe," he said, "but I think Father Raymond added the cinnamon." The priest laughed quietly. Kindness is best when shared. For a while, no one spoke. The fire filled the silence, crackling, gently painting their faces in amber light. Ethan felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest, a stillness that wasn't loneliness. He realized that the emptiness he had carried for years had made room for something fragile and new. He stood and walked toward the window. Outside, sunlight touched the snow, turning it to a sheet of silver. A few children ran past the churchyard laughing as they threw handfuls of powder into the air. Life had returned to Bridgetown. Father Raymond joined him at the window. "I heard about the change in ownership," he said casually. "The community fund wasn't it? Quite generous." Ethan didn't answer at once. "The store will open again next week," he said finally. "But this time it'll give things away instead of taking them." The priest nodded. "A miracle with a business plan." Ethan smiled faintly. "Something like that." Behind them, Lily stirred again. Eli had woken and was playing with the edge of the blanket. She watched the two men quietly, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Father," she said, "can we stay here for a while?" "Of course," the priest replied, "until we find something better." Lily's expression softened with relief. She lay back down, holding her brother close. Her lashes fluttered shut, and soon her breathing evened out. Ethan turned toward the priest. "What will happen to them? For now they have warmth, food, and faith," Father Raymond said. "The rest tends to follow." Ethan nodded, but his gaze lingered on the children. "I used to think faith was for people who had someone to believe in." "And now?" the priest asked. "Now I think it's what keeps us from forgetting how to care." They stood together in silence, watching the fire burn low. When the priest left to prepare breakfast, Ethan walked to the small table by the bed. On it lay one of Lily's candy bags, crumpled but untouched. Inside, the peppermints glowed faintly in the light, red against white like hearts in snow. He picked one up, turned it in his fingers, and smiled. He left it on the windowsill before he walked out, letting the morning sun catch the wrapper. Outside, the storm had left the world cleaner, quieter. The town's roof sparkled with frost. Smoke rose from chimneys in soft gray spirals. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't hurry anywhere. He walked slowly through the square, the crunch of snow beneath his boots, sounding almost like a hymn. As he passed the grocery, its windows dark, its sign already taken down, he imagined the laughter that would fill it soon. Shelves of bread soup coats for children who needed them. Maybe he thought miracles didn't fall from the sky. Maybe they were built one small act at a time until even the coldest town began to thaw. Behind him, the church bell rang again, and the light spilled farther down the street, golden and wide. Ethan lifted his face to it, letting the warmth touch the parts of him that the world had long left frozen. Bridgetown woke to sunlight that seemed almost unreal. After weeks of gray skies, the storm had broken the air wide open. Frost glittered on the rooftops, and the church bell of St. Jude rang out as if announcing not just a new morning, but a new beginning. Word traveled fast in a small town. By mid-morning, everyone knew Hargrove's Mart had been sold overnight. The grocery that once stood as a symbol of greed and gossip was now listed under new ownership, the Bridgetown Community Fund. Nobody knew who had funded it. The papers had been filed at dawn, the bank transfers verified, the locks changed. At the cafe across from the square, townsfolk gathered, drawn by curiosity as much as the smell of coffee. The waitress, the same one who used to leave food by Lily's tray, recited what she'd heard. The new fund says they're turning the place into a community store. Free food for kids and families in need. Someone whistled low. Free in this town must be a joke. Another man shook his head. Maybe not. Father Raymond's name was on the announcement. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Mrs. Hargrove stormed through her darkened store, shouting into her phone. The electricity had been cut. The shelves were empty. Her voice cracked with disbelief. They can't just take it. It's my property. The lawyer on the other end explained calm and clinical that she had already signed the documents weeks ago, buried inside a refinancing agreement she hadn't bothered to read. Her debts, her unpaid taxes, her forged volunteer records, all neatly resolved in exchange for one signature. She dropped the phone. For the first time in years, silence filled the shop. The town she had ruled with gossip had turned away. Her reflection in the window looked older, smaller, colder. Outside, the streets were alive again. Children dragged sleds through the slush. The bakery handed out free rolls courtesy of the fund. The wind carried a sense of relief, as if Bridgetown had been holding its breath for too long and was finally exhaling. At the church, Father Raymond stood before a small crowd gathered on the steps. His coat fluttered in the breeze as he read from a sheet of paper. By grace and generosity, this town now owns a place that once took more than it gave. Let it now give back food, warmth, and hope to those who need it most. Applause rose, gentle but sincere. Lily stood in the front row, her small hand clutching Eli's. She didn't understand every word, but she could feel the happiness around her, see the light in people's faces. Inside the church, in the last pew near the door, Ethan Cole sat quietly. He wore no coat this time, only a simple sweater. He watched the scene without moving, the faintest smile tracing his lips. Father Raymond caught his eye for a moment and nodded in silent acknowledgement. When the crowd dispersed, Ethan stayed behind. He walked to the front where a small plaque leaned against the wall, still waiting to be hung, dedicated to those who believe kindness could outlast the cold. He brushed his fingers across the letters, then turned to go. Outside, Lily was sitting on the steps helping Eli unwrap a piece of bread. When she saw Ethan, she smiled. "We have warm food now," she said proudly. "Father Raymond said the shop will give us coats, too." "That's wonderful," Ethan replied. "You must have been very brave." She looked up at him with her bright, serious eyes. "Did you make it happen?" Ethan hesitated. For a heartbeat, he considered telling the truth. But then he saw how her face glowed with belief, not in him, but in goodness itself, and he didn't want to take that away. "Maybe," he said softly, "it was your prayer that did it." Lily tilted her head. "Then I'll keep praying. Maybe it helps other people too." "It does," he said, and meant it. A gust of wind blew through the square, sending snow swirling around them. Lily laughed, chasing a flake that landed on her mitten. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small candy bag, the same kind she once sold. "We still have a few left," she said. "Want one?" Ethan took the bag, holding it carefully as though it were made of glass. Inside, the peppermints gleamed in the sunlight. "Thank you, Lily." "You're welcome, mister," she said. "You should smile more." He laughed quietly. "I'll try." As they spoke, Mrs. Hargrove passed by the far corner of the street, clutching a single suitcase. No one called after her. She walked faster, disappearing into the pale horizon. The town didn't need to celebrate her leaving. Her absence was enough. That evening, Bridgetown's windows glowed with light. Families gathered for early dinners. Music drifted faintly through open doors. In one of the rooms above the cafe, Ethan sat at a small desk writing a letter. To the board of the Bridgetown Community Fund, please ensure every child in town has a warm coat by Christmas Eve. No names, no signatures. He sealed the envelope and placed it by the window where the candlelight flickered against the snow. Outside, he could hear the faint laughter of two children echoing down the street. He leaned back, smiling to himself. The city's noise, the endless meetings, the isolation of wealth, all of it felt a lifetime away. Here the world was smaller, simpler, and somehow more complete. As he blew out the candle, a soft knock came at the door. When he opened it, no one was there, only a single peppermint on the doormat wrapped in red and white. He bent down, picked it up, and laughed quietly. Somewhere in the distance, the church bell began to ring again. Snow returned on Christmas Eve, softer this time, falling like feathers instead of knives. Bridgetown glowed beneath it, wrapped in ribbons of golden light, and the faint sound of carols drifting through the streets. The air smelled of cinnamon and pine. Inside St. Jude's Church, people gathered for the evening mass. Candles lined the aisles and laughter filled the space once haunted by silence. The pews overflowed with coats and scarves, many donated from the new community store that had replaced Hargrove's Mart. Near the front sat Lily and Eli Grace, their faces bright and clean, bundled in matching red sweaters. They sang softly with the others, their voices thin but true. Beside the altar, Father Raymond read a passage about kindness, how it arrives without trumpet or fanfare, how it endures beyond a single winter. At the very back, Ethan Cole stood quietly. No one recognized him in his plain coat. He didn't come for recognition. He came to listen to the voices, to the warmth, to the proof that something he had done in the silence could echo so loudly in love. After the service, the townspeople gathered outside the church. Children threw snow into the air. Parents exchanged greetings and warm hands. Lily and Eli lingered by the steps, watching the snowflakes drift down. Ethan was about to leave when Lily spotted him. Her small face lit up. "Mister," she called, running across the snow. Eli followed, laughing as his boots sank into the white. Ethan turned, smiling despite himself. "You two should be inside. It's cold." "We wanted to find you," Lily said, catching her breath. "Father Raymond told us someone helped the whole town. I think it was you." Ethan crouched down to her height. "Maybe it was everyone," he said gently. "Sometimes good things happen because many hearts decide to be kind at once." Lily shook her head. "But you were first." He smiled, unable to argue. Snowflakes caught in his hair. The church bells began to ring. Lily reached into her pocket and pulled out a single peppermint wrapped neatly in red and white paper. She held it up to him with both hands. "It's the last one," she said. "Now it's your turn to eat, mister." Ethan looked at the candy, then at her. "You're sure?" She nodded firmly. "You gave us warmth. I can give you this." He took it carefully, as if accepting something far more valuable than a sweet. "Thank you, Lily." Eli tugged on his sister's sleeve. "We saved the other one for Mom," he said shyly. "She could see us now, right?" Lily looked up at the sky where the snow shimmered under the lamplight. "She can," she whispered. For a moment, none of them spoke. The bells rang louder, and the sound felt like light. Ethan looked at the two children, their faces bright, their eyes unafraid, and felt the ache in his chest ease. He unwrapped the candy, placed it on his tongue. The sweetness spread slowly, melting into warmth. "You know," he said, smiling faintly, "this might be the best Christmas I've ever had." Lily grinned. "Me too." Behind them, Father Raymond called, "Come, children, the cocoa's getting cold." Lily waved to Ethan before taking her brother's hand. "Merry Christmas, mister." "Merry Christmas," he replied. He watched as they ran back up the steps, their small footprints filling quickly with snow. For a while he stayed there, listening to the laughter, the bells, the wind moving through the trees. The whole town seemed to breathe together, a living proof that one act of mercy could thaw even the hardest winter. Ethan turned toward the square. The lamplight shimmered on the snow, and he could almost hear another voice, his own long ago, whispering a prayer in the dark. "Please let him eat." Now, decades later, the answer had come, not to the boy he once was, but to the man he had become. He slipped his hands into his pockets, feeling the crinkle of the candy wrapper against his heart. Then he smiled, started walking through the gentle snowfall, and let the bells of St. Jude follow him home. Today's story comes to an end, but its echo still lingers in the heart. What do you think? Give us a score from 1 to 10, and feel free to share a few words in the comments. Every voice here is valued and heard. Before you go, let me ask you gently, are you doing okay today? If your heart feels heavy, let this place be a quiet corner where you can share and find comfort. See you again in the next bedtime story where love and hope remind us that no matter how dark the night may seem, kindness will always prevail.